In this video, you'll journey through 32 unsolved mysteries that continue to baffle historians, scientists, and skeptics alike. From the impossible precision of the Great Pyramids to forgotten civilizations, eerie disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle, and strange messages buried in ancient stone, each mystery challenges what we think we know about the world. Could there have been an advanced society lost to time? Or are these just strange coincidences wrapped in legend? Join HP Unsolved Mysteries as we dive deep into the unknown, where every question leads to more wonder, and every answer feels just out of reach. Welcome to HP Unsolved Mysteries. If this story sparks your deepest curiosity, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment below with your own mysterious thoughts. Tonight we drift across oceans, shadowed by tales too strange to ignore. You're sailing now. No engine, no GPS, just the creak of aged wood and the snap of salt-stiff sails overhead. It's foggy. Somewhere out there, beyond the gray curtain, a shape is drifting slowly, silently. You edge closer and the outline sharpens. A ship, anchored but listing slightly. Its sails torn yet still upright, crew nowhere in sight. This isn't a ghost story. It's the true riddle of ghost ships. Vessels discovered on the open sea, empty, untouched, and deeply unsettling. The most famous is perhaps the Mary Celeste. Found adrift in 1872 near the Azores, her cargo intact, the lifeboat gone and no one aboard. No signs of struggle. No logbook entries to explain the disappearance. Dinner still sat on the table, uneaten. It's not a horror movie setup, it's an official maritime mystery. Historians still argue whether the crew abandoned ship during a storm, fearing explosion from alcohol vapors in the cargo hold, or if something less explainable occurred. Theories stretch from pirates to rogue waves to something even stranger. A panic event, where fear itself caused the entire crew to flee into the unknown. And the Mary Celeste is just the tip of this chilly iceberg. There's the Kaz 2, a modern yacht found off the coast of Australia in 2007. Everything was in place. GPS, running engine, neatly folded laundry. But its three-man crew had vanished. The official conclusion? Something like accidental drowning. But many point out how bizarre it is that all three men would disappear without sending a single distress call or even grabbing a life jacket. Another case, the Hayaim 6, a Taiwanese fishing boat discovered drifting near Australia in 2003. The crew was never found, but the boat's engines were functional, fuel untouched, and personal belongings remained exactly where they should have been. Some fringe researchers claim these cases hint at temporary dimensional rifts, yes, like the Bermuda Triangle, but others keep their feet on the deck and argue for mutiny, piracy, or quiet mental breakdowns under sunstroke and isolation. Still, no consensus exists. And then we get to the real head-scratcher, the Carol A. Deering. In 1921, this five-masted schooner ran aground on Diamond Shoals off North Carolina. The ship was completely deserted. In the galley, pea soup was simmering on the stove, suggesting the crew vanished mid-meal. To this day, no one knows what happened, though rumors swirl around rum-running pirates, communist sabotage, or even interference from extraterrestrial forces. You chuckle, but only a little. Because when stories pile up across centuries, across oceans, you start to wonder, could there be a common thread? Could fear, real, rational, or imagined, drive seasoned sailors to vanish without a whisper? Or maybe it's something older than fear, something hiding in the waves, waiting. Some ships, after all, are never meant to be boarded again. And then there's the mythological overlay. The idea that the sea itself chooses who stays and who returns. Ancient mariners believed in sea spirits, wrathful gods, and cursed waters. A sailor disappears, and suddenly it isn't about weather anymore. It's about balance, debt, silence. Let's not forget the Orang Medan, an allegedly Dutch freighter from the 1940s. The tale claims that distress calls were received from the ship, the last of which said, "All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. I die." When rescue ships arrived, they found corpses frozen in terror, faces twisted toward the sky. A few minutes later, the ship exploded and sank. Did it happen? Maybe. Or maybe it's just the ocean's way of whispering bedtime stories in Morse code. You lean over the railing. The sea below is black, smooth, and endless. Somewhere out there, another ship might be floating silently, forgotten by time but remembered by mystery. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it in your part of the world? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Because ghost ships aren't just about who's missing, they're about what remains. They're about unanswered calls and doors left open, about soup left on the stove and shadows drifting through the fog. And tonight, as the water laps gently at the hull of your imagination, you realize that some mysteries don't knock, they drift quietly into view. You wake up beneath a red sun. Not a sunrise. No, it's already high in the sky, but filtered through a dense orange haze. The landscape around you is dry, cracked, and ancient. No cities, no people, just silence. You're not on Mars. You're in the American Southwest, standing before a canyon wall that pulses with stories too old for ink. We're talking petroglyphs, ancient rock carvings chiseled into the cliffs by civilizations long gone. Hopi, Anasazi, Zuni. Their symbols still dance across the sandstone, spirals, animals, humanoid figures with oversized eyes. Some look eerily familiar. Others look like they were meant for a time far beyond their own. One figure in particular appears again and again, arms outstretched, head surrounded by a halo of radiating lines. Historians call it a solar being. Fringe theorists call it something else entirely. Because here's where things turn strange. Some of these carvings depict what look like advanced technologies. What some claim resemble helmets, antennae, even flying discs. No joke. Ancient astronaut theorists have used these symbols as evidence for decades, arguing that extraterrestrial beings once visited Earth and left their mark, not just in stories, but in stone. Now, to be fair, mainstream scholars still argue whether these shapes are symbolic representations of natural forces, deities, or even just stylized art. A spiral, after all, can mean a galaxy or a water source. But even skeptics admit there's something uncanny about how certain motifs show up all over the world, across cultures that supposedly never met. Take the Wandjina figures of Australia, cloud and rain spirits drawn with enormous eyes and no mouths. Or the Olmec colossal heads in Mesoamerica, monuments with helmets carved from stone. Coincidence, artistic parallel, or something more? The Hopi, for instance, speak of the Kachinas, sky beings who came down from above to teach humanity agriculture and wisdom. They weren't gods in the classical sense, but messengers, guides. The Zuni tell similar stories. So do the Maya and the Egyptians. It's enough to make you tilt your head just a little more. Now enter the big ditch, the Grand Canyon. Most people see it as a geological marvel. But back in 1909, an article in the Arizona Gazette claimed a hidden cave had been discovered there by a man named G.E. Kincaid, funded apparently by the Smithsonian. Inside, Egyptian-style artifacts, statues, even mummies. Of course, the Smithsonian denies the story entirely. No proof, no cave, no records. Fringe researchers cry cover-up. Academics roll their eyes. Yet the rumor persists, spreading like desert fire through conspiracy corners of the internet. Let's take a breath. The air here is thin, dry, and carries thousands of years in every grain of dust. You step closer to one petroglyph, a spiral carved with careful repetition. You press your hand to it. The stone is still warm, still waiting. And you wonder, what did they see? A passing comet, a solar flare, a visitor? Or maybe the mystery isn't what was carved, but why the carvings are still here. Why they've endured storms, erosion, human forgetfulness. Maybe they're not warnings or messages at all, but invitations. Look closer. Even in modern times, these places seem to hum with something unsaid. People report strange lights over the canyon, buzzing sounds, geometric patterns in the air. Is it the wind? The heat? The echo of time? You sit down on a boulder, warm as a stove beneath you. The canyon spreads out like a broken jaw, yawning toward the horizon. It's hard not to feel small here, insignificant, but also watched. Not in a scary way, just observed. Like part of a much older equation, you glance back at the carvings. Maybe they weren't meant to be solved like riddles. Maybe they're frequencies. Maybe they're not asking you to understand, but remember. And that's the most unsettling thought of all, that we've seen these beings before, that we've met them, and then forgot. Quirky side note? Some UFO researchers believe the Grand Canyon region is a hotspot for sightings. Clusters of orbs, lights, cigar-shaped crafts. And let's be honest, if you were piloting a quiet, ancient ship looking for somewhere to land unnoticed, this would be your spot. Low traffic, high cliffs, plenty of history to hide behind. Of course, geologists will tell you it's just erosion, natural beauty, time and pressure carving the earth into stories the mind is desperate to understand. But maybe, just maybe, these stones are storytellers too. And if you're quiet enough, if the wind catches you just right, you might hear them whispering back. The fog rolls in before the sun rises, blanketing the shoreline in a muffled hush. You're standing at the edge of the North Sea, chilled to the bone despite your coat. Just beyond the gray mist, a shape looms from the water, tall, skeletal, and unmistakably human-made. You squint. It's not a lighthouse, it's older, stranger. Welcome to Doggerland, except you won't find it on any current map. Because this place, once teeming with life, no longer exists. 12,000 years ago, Doggerland was a vast stretch of fertile land connecting what is now Britain to mainland Europe. Forests, rivers, hills. It had mammoths. It had human settlements. It was basically prehistoric real estate gold. Then, in a blink of geological time, it vanished beneath rising seas. Gone. Historians still argue whether the final blow was gradual sea level rise or the Storegga Slide, a massive underwater landslide off Norway's coast that triggered a tsunami large enough to drown everything in its path. The mystery? We didn't even know Doggerland existed until the late 20th century. Fishermen started pulling strange things from the North Sea, ancient tools, bones, even preserved chunks of peat. Archaeologists began mapping submerged landscapes using sonar, revealing riverbeds and coastlines, all hidden beneath waves for millennia. Now here's where it gets weird. Some theorists believe Doggerland was more than just a piece of lost land. It might have been a cultural hub, a cradle of early civilization. Think of it as Europe's own Atlantis, a place where early humans gathered, shared stories, built temples, maybe even developed technology we've since forgotten. Fringe researchers go further. They suggest that stories of great floods found in myths across cultures, Norse, Celtic, even Mesopotamian, are distorted memories of Doggerland's sudden submergence, a shared trauma passed through generations as legend. And let's not ignore the curious synchronicity. The biblical flood, Plato's Atlantis, and ancient flood narratives from the Americas all speak of a thriving civilization wiped out by rising waters. Coincidence? Maybe. But by now, we don't do coincidence. Some divers claim to have found structures beneath the sea, stone circles, straight lines that shouldn't be there naturally. The academic community remains skeptical, urging caution. After all, currents and geology can mimic man-made patterns. But still, the rumors persist. You lean forward, peering into the mist. Somewhere out there, beneath the waves, lie the remnants of a forgotten world. Not just bones and tools, but memory, footprints, maybe even names. And you wonder how much of our history is underwater. With climate change raising sea levels once again, Doggerland becomes a cautionary tale, one we might not have fully translated yet. You picture early humans watching their forests slowly drown, their animals scatter, their gods fall silent. What did they think? Did they pray? Did they leave behind warnings carved into stone now buried beneath silt? Modern archaeologists have begun modeling Doggerland's terrain, creating 3D maps of its ancient topography. And it's haunting. You can almost walk through its ghost, following winding rivers, tracing the rise of gentle hills, imagining the firelight flickering in ancient homes now swallowed by the sea. And here's a quirky twist. One theory suggests that the pressure of all that glacial meltwater didn't just flood Doggerland. It might have triggered the very earthquake that led to the Storega slide. In other words, nature wrote its own dramatic ending, with flair. So what are we left with now? A seafloor littered with unanswered questions. A coastline that was once a bustling highway for migration and trade. And silence. A whole chapter of human story ripped from the pages, scattered among barnacles and tide. But if the sea gives up just a few more secrets, a carved stone here, a buried hearth there, we might begin to piece together what really happened. Maybe. You turn away from the fog. The waves keep whispering behind you, as if still trying to tell the story in languages we no longer speak. One more thought before we move on. If a whole civilization could vanish beneath the sea, what else are we missing? What other empty regions once held cities, myths, and miracles? Because the earth forgets, but only on the surface. Underneath, everything waits. You're walking along a winding trail, dense forest pressing in on both sides, the kind of place where sunlight struggles to reach the ground. The trees are old, bent and twisted like they've been listening to secrets for centuries. And just when you think you're alone, you come across it. A wall. But not just any wall. This one runs straight through the forest. Moss clings to it. Vines creep over the top. It stretches for miles. No signs, no explanations, no modern reason for being there. Welcome to the mystery of the Sajama Lines. Except, this isn't Bolivia, and it's not a desert. It's one of hundreds of unexplained ground markings across the world. Sajama, Nazca, the Uffington Whitehorse, the Atacama Giant, and so many others. Strange, massive shapes and lines only visible from above. Historians still argue whether these markings were ceremonial, practical, or something far stranger. Most mainstream theories chalk them up to spiritual paths, astronomical alignments, or even mapping systems used by ancient tribes. But let's be real, you've seen the pictures. Giant spiders, perfectly straight lines stretching over 50 miles, enormous humanoid figures. How did people with no access to aerial views create such precision? That's the mystery. Take the Sajama lines in Bolivia. Thousands of paths etched into the earth across 8,000 square miles. Indigenous Aymara people say they're sacred routes, connecting ancient shrines and villages. But here's the kicker. The lines are perfectly straight, not good for ancient people straight, laser straight. Through hills, through valleys, no deviation. Researchers using satellite data found over 16,000 of these lines crisscrossing the landscape. They aren't roads, they're not fences, and there's no modern reason for them to exist. Yet they persist, etched into the soil like scars on the planet. Fringe theorists have a field day with this one. Some say the lines are part of a massive ancient energy grid, like an Earth-based circuit board. Others propose they were landing markers for sky gods or alien visitors. Sound far-fetched? Maybe. But when you're standing in the middle of nowhere, tracing a line that stretches to the horizon without bending even once, you start to wonder. Let's zoom out, literally. From a satellite view, many of these ancient markings seem to form geometric patterns, even constellations. Some researchers have found alignments with solstices, equinoxes, and the movements of planets. Were these massive canvases early observatories, sacred art, messages meant for the heavens? There's a fringe theory floating around that ties all this together. Nazca, Sajama, Stonehenge, the Great Pyramid, Easter Island. It suggests that ancient cultures across the globe were part of a shared system, building monuments not just as individual efforts but as parts of a network, nodes on a planet-wide grid, a bit like GPS but carved into the Earth itself. That theory even has a name, the World Grid Hypothesis. Wild, yes, but undeniably fascinating. Now for something truly odd. In the early 2000s, engineers testing long-distance wireless energy transmission noticed something strange. Certain ancient sites had anomalous electromagnetic readings. Not enough to charge your phone, but enough to raise eyebrows. One experimenter placed copper rods along Sajama-style paths and measured subtle electric currents, leading some to ask, were these lines part of a forgotten energy system? A communication channel? An ancient tech we no longer recognize? Mainstream archaeology is skeptical, and rightly so. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence, but these lines refuse to explain themselves. They just endure across cultures, continents, and centuries. And then there's the human element. Imagine the people who made them, meticulously walking the land, carving paths they'd never see from above. Did they know? Were they following ancient instructions passed down through generations? Or were they simply honoring something they couldn't quite explain? You crouch beside the path now, running your fingers over the packed earth. The line vanishes into the horizon like an arrow drawn by a hand far larger than your own. It's quiet out here. No roads, no signal, just the occasional gust of wind. In that moment, you feel it. Not awe, not fear, just the nagging feeling that someone or something was trying to leave us a message. We just haven't figured out how to read it yet. Maybe we're not supposed to. But one thing's for sure, straight lines, no matter how ancient, always point somewhere. You sit down on a creaky bench in a town that doesn't show up on most maps. The air smells of burnt pine and rust, and even the birds seem to avoid this place. Welcome to Dublin, Wisconsin, or rather, welcome to what's left of it. Except here's the problem. According to official records, Dublin never existed, and yet people remember it vividly. The Dublin mystery is one of the internet's most chilling examples of what some call a collective false memory, or if you're feeling a bit more conspiracy-minded, a deleted town. It started like most viral legends. Someone on Reddit mentioned a t-shirt from a place called Dublin, Wisconsin. Plain white cotton, bold block letters, nothing flashy, just the name and a blurry image of a lake. They'd found it in their grandmother's attic, and suddenly, Others remembered Dublin too. They described a quiet town with a few streets, a school, a bakery with the best apple fritters you've never tasted. But try to find it on Google Maps? Gone. Check census records? Nothing. Ask local Wisconsin officials? Just confused shrugs. Historians still argue whether Dovland is an elaborate internet hoax, a mass misremembering, or something much stranger. Because the Dublin phenomenon shares eerie similarities with other missing towns legends, like Ong's Hat in New Jersey, a town supposedly involved in interdimensional experiments, or Centralia, Pennsylvania, whose underground coal fire drove everyone away. But Dublin hits different. There are no apocalyptic disasters or chemical spills, no ghost stories or grim urban legends, just absence, as if the town was plucked from memory and buried under layers of reality. Fringe thinkers call these events temporal slips, moments where two timelines briefly overlap and someone brings back a souvenir from the wrong reality. A t-shirt, a photograph, a half-remembered bakery smell. And here's where it gets weird again. Several people have claimed to dream about Dovland after reading about it. Not just vague scenes, full-on dreams with street names, faces they recognize, even conversations. One man said he remembered the layout of a park he swears he visited as a child. Another recalled a stone well on the edge of town, covered in ivy. Of course, skeptics argue that the internet is a perfect breeding ground for contagious imagination. Once a strange seed is planted, people's brains do the rest, especially when nostalgia is involved. Add a grainy photo here, a cryptic thread there, and boom, welcome to Lost Town TikTok. Still, the Dublin story taps into something deeper. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and forget why you came in? That flicker of disorientation? Now imagine it's your entire childhood, a place you swear was real, with friends and memories and smells and sounds, and suddenly it's not just gone, it's been erased. You start to question everything else. That bakery? Was it ever real? That lake you remember skipping rocks across? Was that a dream? Or someone else's memory bleeding into yours? There's even a fringe theory known as historical pruning. It suggests that events, or places, that no longer serve the dominant timeline get trimmed, like dead branches from a tree. The people, the memories, left drifting, like static on an old TV. And of course, some whisper about government experiments, about psychological testing, population control, or massive mind mapping projects that simulate entire towns for behavioral data. Black sites disguised as neighborhoods, wiped when the data's harvested. Sure, it sounds like a Netflix pitch, but what if? You rise from the bench now, brushing sand from your jeans. You glance down at your phone's map app, just an endless stretch of rural road, no markers, no names. And yet, you still feel like you're in the heart of something, somewhere that once had a name, somewhere you might have visited or never left. The mystery of Dovland isn't just about a vanished town. It's about the unsettling possibility that your memories aren't entirely yours, that the edges of your past might not be solid, that what's gone isn't gone, but hidden, maybe deep underground, maybe inside a dream, or maybe just waiting to be remembered again. You tilt your head back, eyes fixed on the night sky, so familiar yet full of secrets. Millions of stars blink silently, and in the space between them, you sense something watching. Tonight, we follow a trail across time and space to one of the most unsettling unsolved mysteries, the WOW signal. It happened on August 15, 1977, a regular night at Ohio State University's Big Ear Radio Telescope, where scientists scan the sky for possible signals from extraterrestrial civilizations. Most nights, static, hums, the occasional space burp. But this night, something different. The telescope picked up a 72-second burst of radio waves, narrowband, precise, and utterly inexplicable. When astronomer Jerry Amon reviewed the printout days later, he circled the anomalous data and scribbled one word in the margin: "Wow." And thus the wow signal earned its name and a place in the halls of unexplained history. The source? Still unknown. It came from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. But when scientists pointed their instruments that way again, they found nothing, just silence. No repetition, no explanation. One cosmic flare-up, never to return. Historians still argue whether the signal was a fluke of technology, a satellite bounce, or the brief whisper of something beyond our understanding. Mainstream theories lean terrestrial, maybe a passing satellite, a secret military transmission, or interference from Earth-based tech. But here's the kicker: no signal of its exact profile has ever been detected again, before or since. And you know what that does to a scientist's brain? It's like finding a single perfect footprint on the moon, then never seeing another step. Of course, this is where the fringe thinkers get very excited. Some believe the wow signal wasn't an accident at all, but a deliberate ping from an intelligent civilization. Not a greeting necessarily, but a breadcrumb. A cosmic "we're here" to see if anyone was listening. Others believe it wasn't meant for us at all. What if the signal was a conversation between two distant planets, and Earth just happened to eavesdrop at the right moment, like tuning into a phone call with only one line audible? Then there's the strange numerology angle. The strength of the signal? 6EQUJ5. Technically, it's just code for signal intensity, but to some it's suspiciously symbolic. 6 characters, almost cryptic. Too neat. There's also the question of silence. If we did hear something once, why hasn't it happened again? SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, has scanned that patch of sky countless times since 1977. They've upgraded equipment, filtered noise, and run simulations. Still nothing. Maybe we missed the follow-up signal. Maybe it came during a thunderstorm, or maybe it wasn't meant to repeat. One unsettling idea suggests that the wow signal was a kind of beacon, activated just once to wake up a dormant network, possibly even inside us. You know those weird dreams you've had? The ones that feel like memories from somewhere else? Maybe that's your internal receiver trying to interpret a frequency from beyond the stars. It's probably nothing. Probably. And yet, the sky remains very, very quiet. It's a paradox known as the Fermi paradox. If intelligent life exists and the universe is so vast, then why haven't we heard anything else? Fringe believers have a theory for that too. They call it the zoo hypothesis. Imagine Earth as a wildlife preserve, watched but not touched. The wow signal? Maybe someone left the gate open just for a second. You lie back now, arms behind your head, staring at those distant points of light. Somewhere in the stillness, you feel the echo of a whisper. Not sound, but presence. One signal. 72 seconds, 47 years ago. Still no reply. And yet the question lingers, patient as the stars. Who sent it? Was it chance or choice? The truth may still be out there, just beyond the range of our current instruments. Or maybe it's already in us, humming beneath conscious thought, waiting for the next whisper from the dark. You blink once, twice, still awake. The room around you is quiet, but your thoughts drift into the thick fog of historical absurdities, where truth seems to hide just out of reach. And now you find yourself walking the damp cobblestone streets of London, a city that has seen plagues, revolutions, and perhaps the most infamous unsolved crime in modern history. Let's talk about Jack the Ripper. You've probably heard the name, of course. Everyone has. But here's the part that keeps historians, criminologists, and conspiracy theorists tossing in their sleep. No one, not one soul, knows who he really was. In the fall of 1888, someone or something stalked the slums of Whitechapel, preying on women in the dead of night. 5 murders, all grotesquely violent, all unnervingly similar. And then, silence. Vanished like fog at dawn. No fingerprints, no footprints, no arrest, just whispers. Even now, over a century later, Jack the Ripper remains an unsolved phantom, haunting our cultural imagination. Historians still argue whether the killer was a disgruntled doctor, a sadistic member of the royal family, or a complete fabrication used to mask deeper corruption in the police and press. Some point to letters allegedly written by Jack himself, taunting investigators with blood-red ink and gory detail. But here's the twist. Many of those letters were likely hoaxes, some even created by journalists trying to sell papers. Yes, fake news in the 1800s. Others, though, too specific to dismiss. Take the infamous From Hell letter. It arrived with half a human kidney, supposedly from one of the victims. A gruesome calling card or a macabre prank? No one knows, but it upped the stakes and deepened the dread. You can almost hear it now. The clatter of horse hooves, the distant echo of a scream muffled by fog, the scrape of boots turning a corner into darkness. Some fringe theorists believe Jack the Ripper wasn't just a man. They suggest he was a time traveler, or a demon, or even a government agent tasked with covering up a series of black market organ trades. Yes, it gets weird fast. Still, every few years, a new name surfaces. A painter, a barber, a migrant worker. DNA tests, handwriting comparisons, linguistic analyses, all promising the answer, none delivering it. Even modern facial reconstruction and forensic linguistics can't definitively pin the identity. And you know what that does to a 21st century mind? It's like someone handed you a Netflix crime doc with the final episode missing. People have poured entire lifetimes into solving this mystery. There are conferences, tours, libraries dedicated to this one series of murders. But the case grows colder with every passing year. What if Jack the Ripper wasn't caught? Because he was never meant to be. Some believe the case was quietly buried, its real answers locked away in lost police records, perhaps destroyed to protect someone powerful. A legacy cover-up. Others think Jack might have died or fled after the last known murder. One theory suggests he immigrated to America and continued his spree under a different name, the Servant Girl Annihilator. Yes, that's real. Sounds like a heavy metal band, but no, just another unsolved horror. Even more chilling, what if Jack wasn't a lone monster? What if the killings were ritualistic? That the brutal, symbolic nature of the wounds hints at some esoteric order or cult operating in the shadow of Victorian respectability. You shake the thought from your mind, but it clings like smoke. The cobblestone streets are empty again. The gas lamps flicker in that dreamlike way. The scent of coal and damp wool lingers. And somewhere in the layers of forgotten history, a man with a top hat and surgical blade walks once more. And he's smiling. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just your mind filling in what time has erased. One thing's for sure. Jack the Ripper isn't just a name in an old file. He's a reminder that even in the age of information, some shadows never lift, and that the darkest corners of human nature sometimes leave no trace. You shift your weight slightly under the covers. The thought of silent killers and fog-shrouded alleys fades, but your brain isn't done with you yet, not while there's another ancient puzzle still whispering through time. Tonight, we glide toward the Pacific Ocean, toward a jagged speck of volcanic rock covered in staring stone faces. Welcome to Easter Island, or, as its original Polynesian inhabitants called it, Rapa Nui. You probably know the image already. A lone, windswept island, home to the towering moai, those iconic statues with solemn faces and elongated heads, some over 30 feet tall and weighing up to 80 tons, built centuries ago without metal tools, wheels, or draft animals, by people supposedly isolated from the rest of the world. That right there is the first mystery. How did a small population on a remote island construct and move these gigantic stone figures? And why? Historians still argue whether the statues were dragged using wooden sledges, rolled on logs, or, in a more poetic theory, walked by ropes, swayed forward step by step like tipsy giants. But there's no consensus. And the islanders' own oral histories, they say the Moai moved themselves. Of course they do. But let's not scoff just yet, because things get weirder. Some researchers believe Rapa Nui's earliest settlers may have arrived far earlier than we thought, like 1,000 years earlier. And some fringe theorists propose they didn't arrive by canoe from nearby Polynesia, but from South America, possibly even Peru. Why does this matter? Because it hints at a civilization with seafaring technology we can't verify, advanced enough to navigate thousands of miles of open ocean, guided by stars, currents, and something else, something we've forgotten. But the biggest enigma isn't just the Moai, it's what happened to Rapa Nui. When Europeans first landed in 1722, the island was mostly barren, its forests gone, its society collapsed into warfare and famine. But was that due to overpopulation, deforestation, or colonial diseases and slave raids that wiped out the oral keepers of history? You know the drill, the official narrative versus the quiet contradictions. And then there's the script, Rongo Rongo, a series of mysterious glyphs carved on wooden tablets, unique to Rapa Nui. Some believe it's a lost written language, one of the very few independently invented by humans. Others claim it's a hoax or post-contact imitation, but no one has decoded it. Even the tablets themselves are rare. Many were destroyed by missionaries who saw them as pagan artifacts. Of the surviving ones, most were collected in the 19th century, when few islanders even remembered what the symbols meant. What if Rongorongo held the answers to everything? The meaning of the Moai, the history of the ancestors, the real origin of the islanders, all lost in translation. Some theorists stretch even further, claiming the Moai aren't statues, but antennae of some ancient energy system. That Rapa Nui was once part of a larger global network of power points, like the pyramids or Stonehenge. That maybe the heads weren't just carved to honor ancestors, but to communicate with the stars. It gets deeper. In 2012, archaeologists discovered the Moai have bodies. That's right. The famous stone heads are just the tips of full-length statues buried beneath centuries of soil, engraved with symbols, still staring at the horizon as if waiting for something. Imagine that. An entire culture carved in stone, looking not inward but outward. Was it longing, worship, or memory? Whatever it was, it endured isolation, collapse, and time itself. The Moai still stand, silent, defiant, watching the waves. And you can't help but wonder, what were they really trying to say? What knowledge faded into ash when the forests fell? What truths vanished with the last speaker of Rongorongo? Maybe the Moai aren't meant to be understood. Maybe they're just reminders, like bookmarks in a story we forgot how to read. But one thing is certain, somewhere on that tiny island in the middle of nowhere, a people once stood tall, built giants, faced the sky, and dared to carve their legacy into the bones of the earth. And that legacy still stands, still stares, still waits, just like the mystery. You inhale softly, the kind of breath that's almost a whisper, as we turn our gaze to the frozen north. There's something about cold mysteries. They feel sharper, don't they? Like the chill gets under your skin faster than the facts. Now imagine this. It's 1845. The Arctic is an expanse of endless white and shifting blue. And somewhere out there, two British ships, the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, vanish without a trace. Welcome to the Franklin expedition. It was supposed to be the crowning jewel of Arctic exploration. Sir John Franklin and 128 men set sail in search of the Northwest Passage, that mythical sea route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific through Canada's ice-choked archipelago. Spoiler, they didn't make it. Historians still argue whether it was starvation, scurvy, lead poisoning from canned food, or just the slow crush of ice and time that doomed them. But whatever the cause, the Franklin expedition became one of history's coldest, darkest riddles. Here's the haunting part. No one knew what happened for years. Rescue missions came and went. Rumors swirled. Inuit testimonies spoke of starving white men stumbling through the snow, and strange campsites littered with bones. But the ships? Gone, as if swallowed whole by the Arctic itself. Fast forward to 2014, 169 years later. That's when the wreck of HMS Erebus was finally found, followed by Terror in 2016. Both were eerily well preserved in the frigid waters, like time capsules from a nightmare, cabins intact, plates still stacked, boots by bunks. But even with the ships discovered, the mystery isn't over. Autopsies on recovered crew members revealed high levels of lead. Some had broken bones that appeared surgically precise, and disturbing signs of cannibalism. Bones with cut marks, skeletons rearranged. Now I know, this is bedtime history, but your brain just sat up a little, didn't it? Here's the twist. Some of the Inuit accounts from the 1800s described the ships being moved after the men had died. Moved, as in sailing again, without a crew. Let that rattle around for a moment. Could the ice have shifted them? Possibly. But could something stranger have happened? Fringe theorists have gone wild over this one. Some claim the men encountered a magnetic anomaly in the Arctic that disoriented their compasses and confused their minds. Others suggest they fell victim to a curse or an ancient force buried in the polar wilderness. And some whisper that the expedition wasn't just about the Northwest Passage. It was about finding something, an artifact, a place, a secret buried beneath the permafrost that even the Empire didn't want to explain. Remember that energy grid idea from earlier? Some believe the Arctic is a key node, hidden by nature, protected by isolation. That Terror and Erebus were never lost, just repelled. But let's bring it back to Earth. One mainstream historical fact remains chilling. The last note ever recovered from the expedition is dated April 1848. It simply says the ships were abandoned, that 105 men remained, that Sir John Franklin had died. That's it. No last messages, no maps, no explanations, just a single sheet of paper and a century-long silence. What happened to those men? How did they survive as long as they did? Did they really turn on each other? Or were they victims of something no one could predict? You lie still in bed, picturing the ice closing in. The dark Arctic night stretching for months. A crew huddled in fur and frostbite, clutching journals and hope, listening for rescue. That never came. It's quiet up there, too quiet. And even now, with technology and satellites and sonar, we still don't know why it happened the way it did, or what they saw in those final days. One thing's certain, the Franklin expedition didn't just get lost. It became a monument to the unknown. A ship-shaped warning, frozen in history, waiting for us to ask the next question. And isn't that what all good mysteries do? They don't close the door. They leave it ajar, just enough to let the cold air slip through. Your breath slows as we drift toward our final mystery of the night. A place where science, folklore, and missing time collide under a cloudless blue sky. You've heard of it, of course. Probably rolled your eyes once or twice. But as with all great riddles, the Bermuda Triangle refuses to go quietly. It's not just a triangle, it's a mood. So you trace its invisible lines. Miami to Bermuda, Bermuda to Puerto Rico, then back to Miami. A stretch of ocean so unassuming it almost dares you to doubt it. And yet, the stories stack up like driftwood on a forgotten shore. Planes vanishing mid-flight, ships evaporating into mist, pilots disoriented, compasses spinning, radio signals fading into static. Mainstream historians will tell you, repeatedly, that the Bermuda Triangle is not statistically more dangerous than any other heavily traveled stretch of sea. They'll cite human error, bad weather, mechanical failure, and yes, the Atlantic can be brutal. Rogue waves exist, squalls appear without warning. But still, something about the Bermuda Triangle feels different, doesn't it? One of the most famous disappearances? Flight 19. It's December 5th, 1945. 5 U.S. Navy torpedo bombers leave Fort Lauderdale for a training mission. The weather's fine. The pilots are experienced. The plan is simple.
They never come back.
Radio transmissions reveal a creeping confusion, navigational instruments failing, landmarks vanishing. "We can't find west," one pilot says. Then silence. Search planes are dispatched. One of them vanishes too. To this day, no wreckage has ever been recovered. No distress calls. Just one cold fact: 6 aircraft and 27 men disappeared without a trace. Historians still argue whether Flight 19 got lost, ran out of fuel, and ditched at sea. But that doesn't explain why experienced pilots all lost their bearings simultaneously. So now we drift toward the fringe. Some suggest the area experiences magnetic anomalies that disrupt navigation systems. Others claim ancient technology, buried deep beneath the ocean floor, pulses with forgotten energy. Some even whisper about time warps, natural tears in the fabric of space-time, missing hours, reversed clocks. Then there's the Bimini Road, an underwater rock formation near the Bahamas that some believe is the remains of an ancient civilization. Atlantis, if you're feeling poetic, a gateway maybe, a beacon, or a warning. And now you're floating above it all, aren't you? Looking down on dark waters so deep they could swallow empires, imagining radar screens flickering and going black, a freighter's lights winking out one by one. It's easy to laugh off these tales, until you realize how many credible people have lived them. Charles Berlitz made the triangle famous in the 1970s. But even today, commercial pilots occasionally report brief losses of time. Fishermen describe strange fogs rolling in from nowhere, and satellites, oddly enough, have recorded bizarre cloud formations over the area. Hexagonal patterns like something nature didn't quite intend. Maybe it's weather, maybe it's magnetic fields. Or maybe, just maybe, there are still places on Earth that don't like being explained. After all, mystery isn't always a question. Sometimes it's a boundary, a fence around a truth we're not ready to meet. And here's where we end our journey, not with answers, but with awe. Because the Bermuda Triangle isn't just about what disappears. It's about what it leaves behind in us. That chill of possibility, the raised hairs at the back of your neck, the little voice that says, "Not everything fits the map." You close your eyes now, floating in the quiet between explanations. The triangle fades into night, and with it, 32 unsolved mysteries. Some ancient, some modern, some silly, some solemn. But all of them reminders, gentle, whispering reminders, that the world is still vast, still weird, and still full of stories no textbook will ever tell. So rest easy now. You've traveled far, but the mystery is always just beginning. Now the pace slows, your breath deepens, and the final images of these mysteries, stone ruins, vanished crews, glowing skies, begin to dissolve into the soft haze of memory. There's no need to solve everything tonight. No pressure to decide what's true or what's just tale. You've walked alongside forgotten builders and silent watchers. You've peeked into tombs, time slips, lost maps, and frozen echoes. And through it all, you've stayed curious. That's what matters. Let that curiosity rest now, not abandoned, just sleeping. The hum of your room folds gently into the rhythm of the world outside, distant wind maybe, or the quiet whoosh of a passing car. Even the silence has softened. It welcomes you, holds you. You are safe. You are still. And the pyramids, the sea, the strange lights in the sky, they're all still out there, waiting. But not urgently. They'll wait. Because the truth, whatever it is, moves at its own pace. And for tonight, it's okay not to chase it. So sink a little deeper into your blanket. Let the weight of the unknown slip from your shoulders, and let the final thought float gently through your mind like mist over a still lake. You don't have to understand everything. You just have to keep wondering. Good night, explorer. Sweet dreams.